Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an instructive blitz game to share with you that was played recently on chess.com. This was played on June 8th. On the white end, Nihal Sarin, and he's playing against Magnus Carlsen. It's only a 3-minute game, but still an instructive one, especially in this endgame phase. A couple nice points we could take something away from. This early stage starts off quiet enough. We have an exchange Carol-Khan. Things do sharpen, though, with white's next two moves, bishop b5 and knight e5. So I'll throw this to you as a pop quiz. How would you react to white's last move? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, I'd say it's very easy to go wrong here as black. I've gone wrong myself in this position before. There's two threats in the position. That's why I think it's very easy to go wrong here. This is the first threat I think of when I see this position. And the move I've played before in this situation is rook c8, defending c6, and saying, hey, I'm also on a half-open file. But that's going to fail to this sequence, the capture on c6, and then bishop a6. Where's this guy going? You're out of squares, rook. These two bishops guard all squares from the rook. White, in short, will win the exchange after rook c8. What about queen c8? Well, queen c8 does not factor in this second threat I'm speaking of. The second threat in the position is g4. This move is only available after the knight goes to e5. The knight and the queen are supporting g4. This is a serious problem for black. What is the problem exactly? Well, this guy is running out of squares after h4. How do you deal with h5? Produce a square for the bishop. In comes knight takes bishop. And you have to do what? Take away from the center. Create two holes deep in your camp, two light square weaknesses. When your opponent has an unopposed light square bishop, you are asking for trouble. This is already considered a decisive advantage for white. So, on this move 8, black must mix defense with attack. Queen b6 fits that criteria. Defensive c6, pressure on the bishop, pressure on the pawn. In this game, c4 is played, defending the bishop. If white addresses this threat by capturing the knight and then going for this second idea, g4, it's not the same because queen d4 is there and white has some problems to deal with. Bishop pressure, knight pressure, x-raying the g4 pawn. The bishop backs off, there's bishop takes pawn. Okay, in this game c4, pawn takes pawn. And the reply to this is a4, defending the bishop. An important line to look at is queen a4. This would force an only move by black. The only move is a6 to address this pressure on the diagonal. Try and get rid of the bishop as soon as possible. If bishop takes pawn, there's queen takes b2, also with an idea of b5 next. And if bishop takes knight, we're taking with the pawn, and we have some queen b5 moves in many lines from here to release the pressure on the diagonal. Okay, but in our game it is a4, bishop d3, knight d takes c4, check, and we get a couple minor piece exchanges in there. Approaching this endgame phase now, queen has to react to this threat, and also watch out for knight d6 check. She's staying off of c7, staying off of this open file. Knight a5, I like the knight going to the edge here. It seems more invasive, pressure on c6 and the weakened b7 pawn instead of the center point. From here, black says, go ahead, take the pawn. I want to get castled. And, okay, white is up the pawn, but black has more activity, better developed side here. Black will soon get the pawn back. Now, it took about a minute, some fun notes about this game. It took about a minute for Carlsen to get to this point in the game, and about another minute to complete the game. The reaction here by white is to go to f3. And after that move, rook c4 hits with the fork. Black soon gets the pawn back. Any other tries here for white to hang on to the pawn, such as rook c1? Not really a great attempt, I don't think. After queen d6, what are you doing to defend the bishop? Do you really want to go into a pin? If you move the bishop now, the queen is overloaded. Defend the rook, defend the pawn. Black would be able to exchange rooks and get the pawn back. Queen takes d4. Any other attempt at this point here? One other move to look at, bishop b5. This does stop the rook c4 pivot, but it's no longer there watching out for knight e4. And this move can hit. It's suggesting here best for white is to go uncastled, to play queen d3, in other words, and allow the check and then step up. Okay. What's the downside if the queen goes here? Well, she could be kicked with a5, and she now must leave defensive d4. And this position here is already considered close to winning for black. Okay. In our game, the bishop simply goes back. Rook c4 hits. Can't save these two. You defend this one, a4 falls. So white says, I'm just going to castle, go ahead, get the material back. Queen takes d4, queen exchange on board, officially an endgame. Where do we go from here? Can you spot Carlsen's 21st move? Took about 2 seconds to pull this one off. What move would you play here? Okay. Feel free to pause the video. Here we go. g5. So when I initially skimmed through this game, this is the first position that really grabbed my attention. I thought to myself, how many players would actually pull this move off? Black is with g5 doing what exactly? He's thinking beyond a flight square. What is a train of thought in this endgame? Well, my opponent has major pieces on board. I still need a flight square, so let me... do I go with h6 or g6? No. Black is, with this move, really extracting the maximum. He's looking beyond this flight square. He's looking to inconvenience this bishop with g4. He's looking to have this pawn cramp the white kingside structure in some way. So, the fewer the pieces there are on board, I think you could look to be more ambitious with the pawn advances in front of your king. I mean, this would be a crazy move to play if there was still a queen on board, or even a dark square bishop for white on board. But it is much more simplified now. We could think again beyond the flight square. From here, h3, h5, g3, g4, chop, chop. Here we go. This pawn has a cramping effect on the kingside structure. It has robbed not only the bishop of a square, okay, it's on g2, it has robbed the king of a square. It no longer has g2. Now, a word of caution, this idea of putting the pawn up to g4, you don't do this in just any situation. For instance, if there are no rooks on board, to fix one of your own pawns on a light square, you may very well be asking for trouble. It's always a potential target for that bishop, but there is more at play here. There are more pieces involved, and black has, in the crosshairs now, the f2 pawn. He's looking to next put the two rooks on the second rank, and it's very difficult to defend f2. You have to go into a strictly defensive position. No, there really isn't an active defense of the f2 pawn, as we will soon see. So this pawn is actually paving the way for some nice mating attacks, potentially, as well. It could maybe support a knight on this square or this square, maybe getting a rook here one day. More positives than negatives, the black pawn on g4. From here, activate the rook. At this point, the white rook goes to c7. We have the B pawn and A pawn being exchanged. Is there any other attempt? Suppose this rook defends the B2 pawn. Not with rook B1, because that would fall, but let's say rook A2, looking next to go after this pawn. Well, that's not going to work. For instance, rook C5 in this position, there's a back rank problem. And we really get to see this cramping effect the G4 pawn has because this check is in there. And what do you do as white? If you block with the bishop, in comes knight E4, hitting the rook. And next up, there's knight D2, taking advantage of the pinned bishop. What's the other option? King H2. King G7, what are you doing about this? It's a big problem for white. You may think to move the bishop. Doesn't matter. Check, here, and here is just one instance of a mating net. Available because of this earlier decision, move 21, G5. Pawn on G4, the squares it's taking away from the king. Problem here for white. This is a winning position. Okay. In this game, it is simply rook C7, rook takes B2, rook takes A7. White must defend F2. Where's the ideal placement for a black rook? Behind the passed pawn. Rook A2, white advances the pawn, king improvement for black. And now a reposition for the knight. Considered even better for black in this position is to tuck this knight right behind this pawn to get it to the G5 square. This is considered best. Coordinates really well with that G4 pawn. And it freezes that bishop. Any movement by the bishop will give up one of these two knight jumps. Okay. Carlsen's idea is to coordinate with the pawn by going to E5, focusing in on that F3 square. Knight D7, bishop B7, knight E5. Get out of the pawn's way before it could move. Black's putting some pressure here, stopping this pawn from moving. At this point, white tries to get behind the passed pawn, tries to overtake these rook positions in a way. Rook D8, rook D1, and nearby, white has this idea. Get to A1, and then we're ready to push the pawn. How do you defend against that? Black goes with rook A5 and meets rook A1 with rook A2. This ensures that the black rook will remain right behind that passed pawn. Black will maintain control over the A file, in other words. From here, a pair of rooks are exchanged. White rook is now activated. There is no coordinated pressure on F2 right now. Black king improves. And now black is going after F2 with the knight. At this point, black says, I'm going to switch my attention to this base point. Try to go after this pawn, but this is not a way to defend at this stage for white. One of the only defending moves here for white is to play rook C2, a fancy move there. That's your way to defend F2. Give up the rook and then this guy gets to advance. This is the suggestion by the engine to go into this ending and try to hold it from here. Okay, rook C2 not played. In this game, rook C6. And from here, knight takes F2. How are we getting to this pawn? How are we defending it? Well, just in the nick of time. Knight check, knight G5, and everything is safe. So that knight is quite the traveler. Where did he go? He was on E5. And from E5, he went here, there, here, circled back, and he's there to defend the base point. And nearby, he's ready to go here and take the pawn with check. This happens. There's not really much white can do about it. This rook, by the way, is what you would say optimally placed behind the pawn and also cutting off the king. Cannot get to the second rank. So from here, it's rook C2. By this point, it is just too slow to get this pawn advancing. White needs too many moves before he could advance that pawn. Meanwhile, this pawn is falling with check. And with that last capture, this guy is now passed. One more move, and White resigns. And that is to simply push the furthest advanced pass pawn f4. White resigns. Nearby, f3, f2 with check, f1 equals queen, mate. Too slow to try something like this for promotion because black is already there. And that's a quick checkmate for you. So White knows this is coming at this stage and simply throws in the towel. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.